Look at her dress. Clearly doesn't belong here. The words didn't slip out. They were placed in the air like poison, meant to spread. In the golden-lit lobby of the Metropolitan Opera, the wealthy Harrington couple let their disdain ripple outward. Mrs. Harrington tilted her jeweled glass, eyes narrowing toward the woman in the flame-colored gown. Her husband smirked, adding louder than necessary. Did she confuse the VIP aisle with the ticket line outside? Conversations faltered. The string quartet in the corner seemed to hush, as if the room itself recoiled. And there she was, the black CEO, a woman whose presence was more command than costume. She stood tall in her burnt orange satin gown, fabric flowing like fire across polished marble. Her hair gathered into a sleek, low bun, revealing a face both poised and unbothered. No diamond necklace, no glittering crown, just a small black clutch, understated, deliberate. To the Harringtons, she was entertainment, a stranger who didn't fit their frame. To the rest of the room, she was almost invisible. But invisibility is not weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. Mr. Harrington leaned closer, voice dipped in condescension. Perhaps she's a server who wandered off. A ripple of muted laughter spread from his circle. Not loud, but cruel enough to sting. She didn't blink. She had heard it all before. At 16, when a hotel clerk asked her to leave a lobby, she had every right to wait in. At 24, when a banker looked at her credit line and said, "Not possible, not for you." At 35, when an acquisition table of men dismissed her with a smirk. Tonight was the same script, just a different stage. And this time, the stage was literal. She moved with quiet precision to her seat, the satin hem whispering against marble. Eyes tracked her, some curious, others cold. She didn't flinch. She didn't fold. She didn't need to. Because this was not just another gala. This was the night an entire industry would learn whose name was written across the $4.4 billion contract behind the curtain. But before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. She sat in the velvet row, spine unshaken, eyes steady on the curtain. Around her, whispers thickened. Phones lifted discreetly. A young journalist in the back row lowered his glass of champagne, pen scratching, sensing a storm. The Harringtons weren't finished. They leaned forward, cruelty rehearsed, arrogance swelling. They thought they owned the night. What they didn't know, the night and the opera house itself belonged to her. The Metropolitan Opera Gala was no ordinary night. Velvet curtains shimmered like blood-red tides. Chandeliers scattered fragments of light across tuxedos and silken gowns. Every corner pulsed with champagne laughter, the kind of sound that said, "We belong here and you don't." She stepped deeper into the hall, the woman in orange. Her satin gown trailed behind her like fire against stone. Heads turned not in admiration, but in question. Guests glanced sideways, whispering as if she were an error in their carefully curated tableau. To them, she was overdressed yet underqualified. Bright fabric, dark skin, no diamond collar to signal pedigree. To them, she was a misprint in the program, and yet in her hand rested the clutch that carried more weight than all their pearls combined. Inside, signatures inked on a $4.4 billion contract, one that would decide whether this theater soared into the future or sank under its debts. A contract with her name etched into its heart, but they didn't know. Not yet. At the gala's edge, a young culture journalist, 23, notebook trembling, watched her every step. His editor had told him, "Find the cracks, the controversies." And here, before the first note of the overture, he sensed one forming. The CEO moved with intent, shoulders squared, gaze steady on the grand stage. Every inch of her said she belonged. But in a room where belonging was policed by fabric labels and family trees, silence became its own rebellion. "Mrs." Harrington leaned again toward her circle. "Do you suppose she has a ticket at all? Or did she sneak in?" Chuckles. Nods. Their cruelty rehearsed, sharpened by years of unchecked entitlement. The CEO didn't flinch. She remembered too clearly. 18 years old, standing outside a country club, told members only, though her father had paid the fees. 30 years old, presenting at a boardroom in Zurich, only to be mistaken for the assistant. Those memories pressed against her ribs, but they did not bend her spine. Tonight she wasn't there to ask permission. She walked to her seat near the center, velvet plush beneath her hand. Yet before she could settle, A man in a black suit approached one of the event managers. He cleared his throat, voice dipped in false politeness. "I'm afraid this row is reserved for true patrons. Your seat must be elsewhere." The room stilled. Guests leaned in, waiting. The CEO raised her eyes slowly. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Silence was her shield, and patience her blade. But patience has limits, and tonight, those limits would be tested under the chandeliers of the Metropolitan Opera. The air thickened. The event manager didn't step back. Instead, he glanced toward the Harringtons as if awaiting applause, then straightened his black lapel. His voice carried just enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "Madam, this section is not available to the public. I'll have to see your invitation again." The words were wrapped in etiquette, but sharpened like a blade. She looked at him once calm, unhurried. The satin flame of her gown caught the chandelier light, but her stillness spoke louder than any sparkle. She opened her clutch and handed him a slim card embossed with her name, embossed in gold. He didn't glance twice. He waved it off, muttering, "Easily forged." Laughter rippled behind him. The Harringtons smiled as if they had orchestrated the entire exchange. "Mrs." Harrington lifted her opera glasses, tilting them like a weapon, whispering just loud enough, "She must think color alone makes her stand out." That whisper spread like perfume, invisible but potent. A nearby donor in a navy tuxedo smirked. Another woman clutched her pearls. The judgment grew heavier than the chandeliers above. The CEO's hands remained steady, resting on her clutch. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. But her silence was dangerous. It left space for others to step in. From the back row, the young journalist scribbled furiously, his pen nearly tearing the page. His instincts buzzed. This wasn't just gossip. It was injustice unfolding live, beneath chandeliers worth millions. He raised his phone discreetly, camera blinking red for the first time that night. The manager noticed and barked, "Sir, no recordings allowed." But the journalist kept his lens steady, whispering, "People need to see this." Gasps fluttered across the row. Phones tilted upward. The quiet spectacle had become a stage within a stage. The CEO turned her head slightly, meeting the journalist's eyes. One look, one shake of her head. Her voice, low but firm. "Not yet. Use your words, not your lens." The journalist froze. The weight of her calm disarmed him more than any threat could. He lowered the phone, but the damage was done. The room knew something was brewing. The manager stiffened, irritation spreading across his face. "Ma'am, if you cannot comply, I'll need to call security." The Harringtons leaned back in satisfaction, as if watching their favorite opera scene unfold. "Finally," Mr. Harrington muttered, sipping champagne. The CEO didn't blink. She had seen this act too many times. The sudden switch from politeness to power play, the reliance on guards instead of fact. And still, she sat. Her calm wasn't compliance, it was strategy. The gala had not yet begun, but already the true performance was underway. And soon, every patron in the Metropolitan Opera would learn they weren't watching her trial. They were watching their own. The velvet row felt colder with every whisper. The event manager hovered at her side, waiting for resistance, for anger, for something loud enough to justify calling security. But it never came. She simply folded her hands over the black clutch and sat straighter in her chair. The orange satin of her gown rippled faintly, a flame refusing to flicker out. Her gaze remained fixed on the stage curtain, as though none of this humiliation deserved her full attention. It was that calm, the kind that unsettles people who expect chaos. The manager cleared his throat again. "Madam, I'll need you to move." No reply. "You cannot remain in this section without proper verification." Silence. The audience nearby shifted, uncomfortable. Whispers sharpened into questions. Why won't she just leave? Does she even have a ticket? But she didn't move. She sat as if anchored to the very foundation of the opera house. The weight of her stillness turned the lobby into a stage, and every eye became a spotlight. In that silence, her memories surfaced not as weakness, but as armor. She remembered being 22, invited to her first investor dinner in Manhattan. Wearing a modest black dress, she was mistaken for the coat check girl. She had smiled then, too, refusing to break, refusing to explain herself to people determined not to listen. That night, she secured her first $1 million investment, not with noise, with patience. And tonight, patience would serve her again. The young journalist from the back, still scribbling, whispered to himself, "Why isn't she defending herself?" His seatmate muttered, because she doesn't need to. The manager, however, misread her silence as weakness. He gestured toward two ushers standing by the aisle. Escort her to the lobby until she provides proof. The ushers hesitated. Something in her presence made the order heavy in their throats. She turned, finally, not to argue, but to look directly at them, her voice low, precise, steady. "If you lay a hand on me, you will regret it. Not because I will shout, not because I will fight, but because you will discover exactly who I am." The ushers froze. The words hung heavier than the chandeliers above. Gasps fluttered through the rows. Some guests frowned, others leaned forward. The Harringtons exchanged smug looks, misinterpreting her calm for desperation. Mrs. Harrington whispered, "Empty threats, always the same." But those closest to her felt it differently. It wasn't a threat, it was a mirror. The CEO turned back to the curtain, her hands still folded, her posture unbroken. She had given them no scene, no scandal to dismiss, only silence sharpened into steel. And in that silence, the opera gala shifted. The stage had not yet risen, but the real performance had already begun. The opera hall was trained to ignore, to sip champagne while injustice passed in plain sight, to laugh politely and let humiliation vanish under velvet carpets. But not everyone stayed silent. From the far left aisle, the young journalist finally lifted his chin. His pen tapped against his notebook like a gavel. The air smelled of perfume and politics, but what he saw was uglier than either. He leaned to the woman beside him, voice low but urgent. "Are you seeing this?" She nodded, clutching her purse tighter. "It's wrong. She hasn't done a thing." The journalist's phone was back in his hand. Lens angled, red light glowing. He whispered into it, "Metropolitan Opera Gala, and they're trying to remove a black guest from the patron section. Watch closely." 2 rows down, a middle-aged donor frowned. "Is this necessary?" She's sitting quietly. His wife shushed him, but not before others caught the words. The ripple was small, but it spread. Silence fractured. The CEO sat steady, eyes on the curtain. She hadn't asked for defense, but witnesses were stepping forward anyway. An usher, younger than the rest, shifted uneasily. His name tag read Julian. He whispered to his colleague, "I checked the seat list earlier. I think her name was on it." The colleague shook his head. "Don't get involved." But Julian's eyes stayed on her, on the woman in orange who radiated calm under fire. Mrs. Harrington noticed the murmurs, her lip curling. She raised her glass again, whispering louder this time. If she were truly someone, she wouldn't be sitting alone. That sentence stung. It was crafted to. The CEO let it land without moving, but others heard it differently. A couple 3 rows back exchanged glances, discomfort painted across their faces. The journalist couldn't take it anymore. He stood halfway, clearing his throat. His voice trembled but carried. "Excuse me, why are you asking her to leave? She's done nothing wrong." The room stiffened. Gasps. Heads turned. The event manager froze, thrown off script. The Harringtons rolled their eyes, dismissive. "Another amateur stirring noise," Mr. Harrington muttered. But it was too late. The silence had cracked. One witness had spoken, and now others felt the urge to echo. A young soprano in training, seated near the back, whispered, "I've seen her photo. She's a sponsor." Her words, though quiet, were caught by 2 guests beside her. They leaned in, whispering faster, uncertainty unraveling the polished calm of the gala. The CEO still hadn't spoken. She didn't need to. The witnesses were finding their voices. And once voices begin, they rarely stop. The chandeliers glittered above, but the true light now came from whispers shifting into truth. The manager's mask of courtesy cracked. Witnesses were stirring, the whispers multiplying, and he needed to regain control. He straightened, tugging at his jacket as though the gesture alone restored authority. "Enough," he said, louder this time, drawing the room's attention. "This guest is not authorized to sit here. She refuses to provide valid credentials. She is disrupting the gala. Security stand by." The words rang like a verdict, not a request. The Harringtons nodded in smug approval. Mrs. Harrington smirked, tilting her opera glasses again. "Finally, someone taking charge." The young journalist rose higher from his seat. "She gave you her card. I saw it." His voice quivered, but conviction steadied him. The manager shot back instantly. "Easily falsified. You'd be surprised what lengths people go to for a taste of luxury." That word "people" carried weight. Heavy. Loaded. Gasps rippled through the velvet rows. A donor whispered, "Did he just say that?" Another muttered, "Careful. This is being recorded." The CEO turned her head slowly, eyes locking on the manager. Her voice was calm, almost soft. "You are accusing me of fraud, in public, without evidence." The manager sneered, mistaking her composure for submission. "Fraud? Con artist? Call it what you like. You don't belong in this row. You don't belong in this house." The chandelier seemed to dim under the weight of his words. From the back, Julian, the young usher, took a step forward before his colleague held him back. His jaw tightened. "She's on the list. I know she is," he whispered again, this time louder. The manager ignored him. He gestured to the ushers more firmly. "Remove her!" Phones tilted higher. The journalist's red light glowed brighter. Guests no longer sipped their champagne. They leaned in, drawn by the spectacle they hadn't paid to see but couldn't turn away from. Mrs. Harrington laughed softly, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Imagine thinking that dress makes her someone," a flame burning in the wrong theater. The CEO did not flinch. She sat straighter, her eyes steady on the stage curtain as though waiting for the overture to begin. But when she spoke again, her voice carried farther. "Every word you say reveals more about you than it does about me." The manager scoffed. "Spare me the philosophy. Patrons earn their place. They don't pretend." The hall stilled. Those words echoed ugly, undeniable. A woman near the aisle whispered, "Patrons. She's the reason we're here." The CEO folded her hands tighter around her clutch. Her silence had been armor. Her words had been measured. But the insults had sharpened into a blade, and soon that blade would turn. For now, she waited. She let him dig deeper. She let the witnesses absorb every syllable. Because the reckoning wasn't far, it was already walking down the aisle, disguised as patience. The manager's voice cracked through the velvet air like a whip. Security now. Two guards in black jackets moved from the shadows of the aisle, their polished shoes striking the marble like a drumbeat of authority. Conversations hushed. The opera's golden glow dimmed beneath the cold edge of what was unfolding. The CEO remained seated, her clutch resting gently in her lap, her eyes never leaving the stage curtain. She was stillness carved in flame. The first guard stepped forward, broad shoulders blocking the chandelier light. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." The manager added quickly, louder than necessary, "She is not a patron. She's trespassing. Remove her immediately." Gasps erupted. The young journalist half stood, his phone raised again. "She has a ticket. You saw her card." The manager snapped back, "Sit down before you're escorted out too." But the words had already cut the air, drawing murmurs from every row. "Mrs." Harrington leaned into her husband, whispering with venomous delight, "This is what happens when they think money can buy class." Her words weren't quiet enough. A guest 2 rows away turned sharply, eyes narrowing in disgust. The guards approached closer. One reached a hand toward the CEO's arm, and then the moment fractured. Her voice rang out, calm yet razor-sharp. "Touch me, and you will answer for it. Not in this hall, not tonight, but in every boardroom that keeps your job alive." The guard froze, his hand inches from her sleeve. Something in her tone measured, absolute rooted him in place. He pulled back slightly, uncertainty flickering across his face. The manager stepped in, trying to mask his frustration with bravado. Empty threats. "She's nothing but a spectacle in orange satin." But his words betrayed him. The room felt it. The tension wasn't hers anymore, it was his, unraveling with every insult. The young usher Julian couldn't stay silent any longer. He took 2 steps forward, voice breaking but brave. "Her name is on the sponsor list. I saw it this morning." The hall erupted in whispers. Guests twisted in their seats, eyes darting between Julian, the CEO, and the red light of the journalist's phone. The manager spun, fury lacing his words. "Quiet! You'll lose your job for lying." Julian's voice rose stronger. "I'm not lying. You're the one trying to erase her." The silence that followed was heavier than any aria. The CEO lifted her eyes, locking onto the manager's face for the first time. Her tone did not rise, but its clarity carried through the hall. "You called me a fraud in front of witnesses. You summoned guards to remove me without evidence. You laughed with those who mocked me." She paused. Her hands tightened around the clutch. Every word, every gesture recorded, logged, remembered. The journalist's pen stilled. The crowd barely breathed. The guards stood frozen, caught between orders and the truth hanging in the air. The gala was no longer about music. It was about power, and the power was shifting. The hall trembled with silence. The guards lingered, the manager seethed, the Harringtons smirked as if the verdict had already been written. But the woman in orange had not moved. She sat poised, one hand steady on the black clutch. Then, with deliberate calm, she opened it. Inside wasn't jewelry or a fanfare of luxury. It was a phone, slim and silent, glowing against satin. She tapped once. The sound of a single vibration carried like a drumbeat. Her voice, low and precise. "Nia, Protocol 4. On the other end, a crisp reply, immediate. "Understood, ma'am. Logging incident now. Full audit in progress." Gasps rippled through the rows. Guests glanced at each other. Protocol? Audit? The words sliced through the glitter like unwelcome truth. The manager stiffened. "Who are you calling? This is a private event. Put that away." But she ignored him, eyes locked on the velvet curtain, voice steady into the phone. "Timestamp every insult, every attempt to remove me. Flag the Harringtons' remarks. Notify legal and finance." The journalist leaned forward, his pen trembling. The weight of what he was hearing pressed onto every page. This wasn't a guest improvising defense. This was command. The young usher Julian whispered, wide-eyed, "She's not bluffing." The manager tried to laugh, but the sound faltered. "Ridiculous. No one in this hall cares about your little calls." She turned her head slowly, meeting his eyes. For the first time that night, her gaze was direct measured steel beneath calm flame. "Careful. You are speaking not to a guest. You are speaking to the principal investor of this theater." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Shock rippled outward. Guests whispered fiercely now, some leaning over velvet rows. "Investor? Is she serious? 4.4 billion, wasn't it?" Mrs. Harrington scoffed, though her hand trembled against her champagne glass. "A story. Nothing more. She's bluffing." But the CEO's phone lit again. Nia's voice cut through, amplified by the hush. "Contract review complete. Your sponsorship of the Metropolitan Opera stands at $4.4 billion. Documentation verified. Do you wish to proceed with escalation?" The words echoed in the chandeliered silence. The guards froze. The manager's lips parted, searching for a reply that never came. Even the Harringtons faltered, their smugness draining as the weight of truth crashed against their arrogance. The CEO closed her clutch with a quiet click. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. "Proceed," she said simply. And with that single word, the gala shifted. This was no longer their theater, their playground, their performance. It was hers. The velvet hush broke like glass. Conversations sputtered, fragmented into disbelief. The manager's jaw tightened, his eyes darting from her clutch to the guards, who suddenly looked less certain of their orders. The woman in orange finally stood. The satin gown cascaded down the velvet seat, glowing under the chandeliers like a flame refusing to die out. Her voice, calm but amplified by the weight of silence. "You said I don't belong here, that this house is not mine. Let me correct you, this house exists because of me." The words struck harder than any overture. Gasps tore through the rows. The journalist's phone shook in his hand, capturing every syllable. Julian, the young usher, whispered under his breath, "I knew it." The CEO's gaze swept the hall. She wasn't asking for permission. She wasn't pleading for validation. She was delivering truth. "I am the principal investor of this theater. I signed the $4.4 billion contract that keeps these lights on, that pays these salaries, that keeps every one of you seated here tonight. You mocked me in the very house I sustain." The chandeliers glistened, but it was her words that lit the room. The manager's face drained of color. His lips stammered, searching for denial, but his voice betrayed him thin, cracking. "That's impossible." She didn't blink. She opened her clutch again and pulled a single folded document. Thick paper, embossed seal, the signature clear at the bottom. She held it high, not for the manager, but for the witnesses already filming. "Here is your proof. Board Resolution 2217, B. Sponsorship finalized under my name, effective immediately." The hall erupted in a different kind of murmur, one of recognition. A donor near the front row gasped, "She's the Carter Foundation." Another whispered, "She owns the future expansion deal." Mrs. Harrington's champagne flute slipped in her hand, spilling onto her gown. Her husband's smugness melted into panic. his eyes darting toward the exits as though escape could erase what they had said. The journalist's pen scratched furiously. This is history. This is the night the mask slipped. The CEO's eyes returned to the manager. Her tone sharpened, still calm but lethal. You called me a fraud. You summoned guards to drag me from my own theater. You tore at my dignity in front of witnesses. And yet, without me, there is no gala, no curtain, no opera. The room inhaled as one. She lowered the contract back into her clutch, the quiet click of its clasp echoing like a gavel striking. So tell me again who doesn't belong here. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. The gala wasn't watching an outcast anymore. They were staring at the owner, and for the first time all night, the Harringtons couldn't find a single word. The revelation cracked the gala open like a fault line. The manager's posture crumbled first. His spine, once stiff with arrogance, bent under the weight of realization. Sweat collected at his temple. He muttered half-formed apologies, each word thinner than the last. I didn't know, ma'am. If I had known... But the words were useless. Everyone had heard what he had known. His insults, his orders, his certainty that she did not belong. The guards who had stood ready to remove her now shifted awkwardly, their arms falling to their sides. One even took a quiet step back, as if distance could erase complicity. Julian, the young usher, stood straighter than all of them. He looked from the CEO to the trembling manager, his voice steady. She told you, and you didn't listen. You never listen. Ugh. Gasps fluttered again, but this time not in shock, in agreement. Mrs. Harrington clutched her pearls so tightly her knuckles whitened. Her earlier smirk had dissolved into a quiver. She whispered to her husband, voice thin and panicked, "We should leave. Now." But it was too late. Phones were raised in every direction, red lights blinking like fireflies in the chandeliers. Escape wasn't possible. The room was already recording their downfall. Mr. Harrington tried one last veneer of control. This is a misunderstanding. We had no idea who she was. The CEO turned her gaze on him. Calm, sharp, undeniable. Exactly. You didn't care who I was. You cared only about who you thought I wasn't. His shoulders sagged. The words hollowed him out in front of everyone. The donors in the first row began to murmur, some nodding, others shaking their heads in quiet disapproval. A woman in a sequined gown whispered to her companion, "She saved this theater," and they mocked her like she was nothing. The manager tried again, voice breaking, "Please, it was policy, standard protocol." The journalist cut in, his voice carrying with conviction now, "Policy doesn't explain the insults. Policy doesn't explain your smile while you humiliated her." Applause broke out, not thunderous, but enough. It spread like sparks, hesitant at first, then louder, until pockets of clapping rose across the hall. Guests who had stayed silent now aligned with truth. The Harringtons froze, pale beneath the chandelier glow. Every eye had turned against them. Every whisper was about them. Their power in that room had evaporated. The manager sank into his own shadow. The guards retreated to the aisle, unsure, unwilling to be remembered in the same frame. And in the center of it all stood the woman in orange, unmoved. She hadn't shouted once. She hadn't pleaded. She hadn't begged the hall to believe her. She had only revealed what was already true. The collapse was complete, and everyone in that room knew it. The applause faded into a brittle silence, the kind that waits for judgment. All eyes returned to the woman in orange, standing at the center like a flame no arrogance could extinguish. She opened her clutch once more. The document gleamed beneath the chandeliers, the contract itself, embossed with the seal of the Metropolitan Opera. Her voice was calm but final. This contract represents $4.4 billion in funding. Funding I have poured into the future of this theater, into every voice that sings here, into every curtain that rises. But tonight, you showed me how little you value the dignity of those who sustain you. The manager's knees nearly buckled. Please, don't do this. The board needs you. We all... She silenced him with a glance. Her tone sharpened, still steady. I am not here to be needed. I am here to be respected, and tonight, you failed. Gasps rose again, louder than before. The Harringtons' faces drained of color. Mrs. Harrington shook her head as if denial could rewind the night. You can't just walk away from billions, she whispered. But the CEO's gaze was unwavering. She tapped her phone, her assistant's voice crisp and immediate through the speaker. Nia Thompson, Board confirmed. Do you authorize termination? The entire hall froze. The CEO lifted her chin, scanning the sea of faces, guards, donors, manager, the Harringtons shrinking into their seats. Effective immediately, she said. Terminate the $4.4 billion deal. Pull all funding. This house has no patronage under my name. The words thundered louder than any aria. Phones recorded as the manager's face collapsed. He stammered, "No, you can't. This will ruin us." She replied, calm as stone. You ruined yourselves the moment you decided humiliation was policy. Julian, the young usher, exhaled a shaky breath. The journalist's pen stilled, his voice a whisper into his recorder. This is the moment everything changed. The Harringtons sat frozen, the realization crashing in waves. Their laughter had summoned their own undoing. They weren't mocking a stranger anymore. They had mocked the very foundation of the house they worshipped. The CEO closed her clutch for the final time. The quiet click echoed like a verdict. She turned, her satin gown trailing behind her, every step deliberate. The crowd parted instinctively, as if the marble itself had shifted to make way. The gala wasn't theirs anymore. It was hers, and in a single sentence, she had erased it. The opera hall was silent. No violins, no overture, only the echo of her footsteps across marble. The chandeliers glittered above, but they no longer dazzled. Their light seemed pale compared to the fire in her gown. Guests shifted in their seats, whispers tangled into one truth. They had witnessed a reckoning. The manager stood hollow, his authority shattered like stained glass. The guards kept to the aisle, avoiding her eyes, afraid of being remembered in the footage now streaming across glowing screens. The Harringtons sat stiff, pearls trembling in Mrs. Harrington's grip, their champagne untouched, their arrogance curdled into fear. The CEO paused at the center of the aisle. She turned not for them, but for the witnesses, for the journalist still clutching his pen, for Julian, the usher who dared to speak, for every guest who had stayed silent until the truth could no longer be denied. Her voice was clear, steady, carrying to every corner of the hall. I don't need applause. I don't need headlines. I don't need to prove my place to anyone in this room. You mocked me as if I were invisible. You tried to erase me as if I were disposable. But understand this. I am the final act. I am the reason this curtain rises, and the reason it will not rise again tonight. Gasps rolled through the velvet rows. Phones trembled in hands, recording history as it unfolded. She took a final step toward the stage, eyes fixed on the crimson curtain, her tone lowered, softer but sharper. You mistook my silence for submission. That was your last mistake. And with that, she turned, walking toward the grand doors. The crowd parted as if marble itself shifted to make way for her. Her gown trailed like fire through shadows, a blaze that left nothing untouched. Behind her, applause erupted, not polite, not hesitant. It rose raw, uneven, powerful, not for the gala, not for the performance that would never begin, for her, for the truth she had carved into the night. The journalist's voice, trembling into his recorder, captured the only words that mattered. This wasn't an opera, this was justice, and we were here to see it. The doors closed behind her. The chandeliers still glittered. The curtains still hung heavy. But the Metropolitan Opera would never be the same, because one woman had turned humiliation into judgment, silence into steel, and a gala into a courtroom, and her verdict was final.